Anupma Raj is a Microsoft manager and one of the best ones I've encountered so far. I would always go to her for any kind of career advice. This episode is especially for students who are about to finish their education or for young professionals early in career. Which skills should be prioritized to learn? And what should you bring exactly to the table when you network with people? This and many more topics will be discussed. This is the Charlotte Martin podcast. Have fun in this episode with Anupma Raj.
Hello.
I'm very excited to have the conversation with you. Next week will be my last week at
Yeah.
Microsoft. So I'm ready for the market
Yeah.
to apply for full time jobs and having a conversation with you to get advice from you how to land an interview, how to land a job.
hmm
I'm very excited to discuss that with you today.
Yes, me too. Very sad that your internship is ending, but very happy to help in any way I can to set you up for the next steps.
So yeah, I will also get my technical degree soon, so I will have a master's degree.
hmm
And I was thinking about the possible jobs I could apply for.
hmm
So I've been doing an internship and as an IT consultant, so
Yeah.
cloud computing, cloud solution architect.
Right.
I could do maybe a developer job,
Yeah.
engineering job, software engineer, data analyst. If we think about also the industries,
hmm
I was thinking about either going to a big tech company
hmm
like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, for example,
hmm
or what about if I go to a company which is not related to tech but be in a tech department?
Mm.
For example, let's say like in the automotive industry or a
Yeah.
pharma industry, because I
Yeah.
feel like pharma industries are very controversial. I would love to get into this industry because it's very exciting or interesting to me.
Yeah.
But seeing the tech side of that,
Yeah. Right.
what would be the difference?
Oh, lots of dimensions to that question. Um, so what I would share is largely kind of flavored from my own experiences because I did work in a non-tech company in a tech role. So it's a very big publishing house, I think the biggest in Europe. But their tech department was like a few 20, 30 people at the time. And it was a very different experience than all my full-time jobs, which have been in big tech companies. And I think a couple of things differentiate the experiences. First is when you're working for a non tech company, the tech department is there to host whatever that company is doing in a digital environment, right? And whatever that looks like, whatever that implies. But you are not creating products. And
Hmm.
I think that's the fundamental piece that differentiates you working for a Microsoft, Amazon, Google, when the innovation is coming from in house and the products that a non tech company would then use to host their architecture, that's all being built in house for you. Um, that's a different. That's a different experience because you get to first see the speed of innovation, the direction of innovation, the trends that you're heading in. You're the first in the market to come
Hmm.
across those, of course, because you're inventing them. Um, and you have access, I think, also to some of the best like research and innovation minds in the market because these are really, I
Hmm.
think, the top. These are the companies that hire the top talent or try to at least. So that's one difference. The other is also, I think, about scale. So it's exponentially impactful, right? The scale that we're talking about. If you develop something with a Microsoft, for example, or a Google or an Amazon, you work on one portion of one product, but it will still reach billions of people.
Hmm.
Versus if you are working for a non tech company and implementing their architecture or their environment, you're using these products, but you're doing it only for that. And then the end users of that company will
Hmm.
use that experience, but it's not the same as inventing the product. So that's, I think, the largest thing I would take away from the two.
Hmm.
Um, I think the other piece, especially if you're early in career and you're thinking of choosing between the two, it's really about what kind of projects and learning opportunities you get. Sometimes the flip side with working for these big providers is you are a very small part of a very big picture versus in non-tech companies where, if it's not a very big setup, you do get more responsibility, you get to access different parts of the IT landscape, which maybe you wouldn't if you were just part of one team in a bigger company. So think of like where you're landing, what you're going to do there.
Mm-hmm.
And early in career, it's normally nicer to like learn more of everything, get exposure to more things. So then you know a little bit, at least level 50, level 100 of everything, to know if it's an interesting enough direction for you
Yeah.
to follow. Versus if you specialize too early and then you don't know what the broader level 100 breadth is.
It's like you read my mind.
Yeah.
All these questions I had in mind, you just answered.
Oh, damn.
So
did we cut the script in half? Oh, no.
no, but I think it's very interesting, as you said, like working for Microsoft. They here we have 2,000 employees,
Yeah.
so we're very ahead of the innovation, which
Mm.
means when I want to reach out to another department talking about the newest features of a product, I just reach out on Teams,
Yeah.
and that's very easy. So,
Yeah.
and as you said, like you get a high level perspective on like what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I really appreciate at Microsoft.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, thanks for your perspective on when I would join an on-time company, because that was also in my mind. Because I feel like it's easier to stand out when you're in a smaller team and
Yeah.
have more impact.
Yeah. That's true. I think so. If I think back to the project that I did, that was like building. This was back when I was working with Cloud Foundry as a provider, and this was back when Cloud Foundry didn't have an autoscaler. Now it seems like crazy that
Mm-hmm.
was also a time. But to get to build such a piece, I mean, imagine doing that and implementing that for the whole of Microsoft. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not going to happen. There's going to be 100
Yeah.
steps in the way before you roll out for a company this size, right? So you do get a lot more control and influence and impact when, if you have the right project. So you have
Mm-hmm.
to pick kind of the right landing spot.
Regarding the trends and the hot topics, or what's hot in the market, there are different solution
Mm-hmm.
areas like data and AI,
Mm-hmm.
machine learning, security applications.
Yeah.
Um, Especially OpenAI
Mm-hmm.
is very hot right now.
Yeah.
Is it a market to consider right now? Because there's a lot of it's everywhere on LinkedIn,
Mm.
but is there a market available right now for that?
A market for you to join as an employee, you mean?
Yes.
I mean, honestly, I would say the trend and the hype around AIML right now, that will change a lot of the way products are developed, the way we work. It will influence your working life significantly, I think, in the next 5 year span for sure, probably quicker. But from an employee point of view, if you were to join, the thing about AIML is typically, and it's just my experience, it could be different for others. I've noticed as you get into the complexities of actually deploying production um, models and like really taking an AI solution live for an enterprise customer, there's so many implications. And so there's a whole security and data privacy part of it. And then there's the technicality of it. And if I were to compare AIML folks in the team to the rest of the technologies, there's a seniority that's required there. So
Mhm.
typically these people have done research in the field. Average profile is like with a PhD in that area. And then they have like 5 to 10 years in the market actually deploying all of this to production. And that's when, as I would say, a larger cloud provider, you would say, okay, this person would really be able to handle all the dimensions of a conversation with a customer. I don't know if like straight out of uni, that's something that I've seen too often happening. Yeah.
So I'm already out.
I no, I don't. I wouldn't say you're out. I would say work towards that skill set,
Hmm.
right? And 5 to 10 years, maybe that's too large a span.
Yeah.
It could be quicker, right? But the idea is in that time you build experiences about all the implications of taking something to production and understanding where AIML fits into the bigger architecture
Hmm.
piece, right? You have to understand data, the entire landscape before you even reach the ML conversation. How are you hosting it? How are you pre-processing it? What are you like? So it's an end-to-end architecture discussion you have to have with a crazy amount of depth then in AIML.
Hmm.
So that takes time, right?
Hmm.
And that takes experience with different scenarios, different customers to build up. I think you can absolutely do it. You
Hmm.
have to be intentional that you're working in that direction.
I see. So rather have a
Yeah,
ramp up very broadly
yeah.
and then go into depth with AI.
I'm a big fan of that for like early in careers. Like always start by understanding the larger
Hmm.
landscape so that you have an idea of all the different pieces that correlate
And then
before you start
decide. Hmm.
specializing. If you can do it in balance, that's typically the best because I think people who are early in career and who are just starting out, they have so much energy and so much enthusiasm and they want to execute and create impact. And it's a bit of a conundrum because, you know, you're typically in your first year, it's a learning curve, right? You're learning to the technology, the company, what customers want, and how to pull all of that together. And to generate impact while you're in such a steep learning curve is tough. But if you can do the level 100 thing and find like one piece where you specialize, a very small, well
Hmm.
scoped piece of technology where you're like, okay, this is my home turf,
Hmm.
then it's a good balance between the two. Then you have the breadth, but then in a small area, you also feel like, okay, I can already execute here. That builds confidence, that builds like good experiences on having scoped customer conversations, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I feel like patience really pays out in the first year
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
because you will see it in the long run. Maybe not in 2 years, but maybe in like 4 years, you will
Mm,
see like if you have already a good foundation,
yeah.
you can really build up on that,
Yeah.
especially in tech.
Yeah. Definitely.
Any other trends which are hot in the market to consider?
I'm very biased to where we are in the market. So
Hmm.
I would say, like, generally, cloud's a very safe, good space to be in, and has been for at least the last decade, I would go as far as to say. And I don't see that dimming anytime soon. I think we're heading more towards like serverless and like
Hmm.
more of just end to end automation. In Germany, that hasn't really rolled down to the customer level yet. You see it more in other markets. So probably here locally, that would be the next set of terms. You see it with AIML already, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of automation being built into products. But if you think of, for example, architecture setups and they're going kind of hands off, having everything serverless, automatically managed, I think that's going to be what we'll see as the next common status quo, probably. Uh,
So when I land a tech job,
mm,
if I'm a full-time employee, there's a lot to learn in the beginning, maybe
yeah,
a little bit overwhelming, especially getting new into a company,
yeah,
learning new just the system,
yeah.
also having the technical ramp up. So how can I evaluate and prioritize which skills to focus on developing?
Hmm. So early in career, I think if it's a technical role, let's make it a little more specific. Let's say it's the kind of role we have in our team, right? What you've been doing the last year, which is technical pre-sales, mid-sales kind of role. So you need two sets of skills there. I think the first thing you should do as soon as you land is identify what skills are required for you to succeed in that area, because that's going to be your starting spot to building those skills, right?
Both
So
hard skills and soft skills.
absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And you can probably learn, so look up the evaluation criteria for your role. That's the easiest starting spot. But then speak to your manager, speak to your colleagues, speak to people who are successful in role and who are unsuccessful in role, and try to identify kind of the patterns on what goes right and what doesn't.
Hmm.
Um, Once you have an understanding that these are the kind of technical skills I need, these are the hot topics, these are the prios for my company this year. So for us, it might be, I don't know, so you've heard this 100 times, SQL, AI, like the same
Mm-hmm.
topics over and over. That gives you a good indication that this is relevant to the business, it's relevant to the market, and potentially it would be a good starting spot for me to develop my skills into. Then it's about understanding how long it would take you to build expertise in those topics, right? So going back to what we discussed earlier, keep it in balance because you do want a little bit of fulfillment from delivering on topics where you can ramp up quickly. If you sign up for a topic where it takes you 5 years to become an expert, that's not a very fulfilling experience, especially in the beginning of your career when you want to deliver. So keep it in balance, I would say. Understand the priorities, technology wise, for your company, your business, your customers, and try to find a bit of a mix between what's business relevant and what you can easily deliver on. I think outside of that, the soft skills are those that extend beyond just what's required to execute on the job. So
Mm-hmm.
typically, communication skills, networking, that's really a non negotiable, be it in tech or in non tech. So be very intentional about
Mm-hmm.
those things. And they're like really easily available resources, I would say now. I don't know, on YouTube, on Google, whatever. But with the networking thing, I think what I always suggest is like a good starting spot is look up your org chart and really work through that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then go to parallel orgs. And if you have the company culture where there are no restrictions for you to reach out to whoever you want, and I would say try it anyway, even if you don't have that culture, um, that's a good way to learn from the people around you what drives them, why they do the things they do. That helps later in collaboration. That also helps you understand, could this be a future next step for you, 2 3 years down the line. So that's, I think, a key piece: soft skills, hard skills, networking, and understanding the system. That's not directly related to the role that you're doing, but if you don't understand what would make you successful in the ecosystem you've landed in, that will, yeah, that's a really key piece. So,
Let me linger on the networking thing.
yeah,
And also the networking part you just mentioned.
yeah.
I feel like, especially when you're early career, you tend to be not very self confident and just reach out to people.
Mm,
But I was reading a post on LinkedIn, like if you make a decision, for
mm,
example, reach out to this person, yes or no, for a coffee date, yes or no,
mm,
it's very, if you rationalize it and say like what are the opportunities you can get, have
mm,
a great conversation, great insights about a role you've never encountered before, a
yeah.
person with great personality you want to just
Mm,
know, and the risks are that they ghost you
mm,
and you can continue with your life. So
mm,
it really helped me to take the initiative and just make the
yeah.
best out of networking.
Yeah. And how often have you been ghosted, or has someone turned down?
Good question. Almost never.
Yeah.
There was also, even though like ghosted never, but I think if 10 or 20% said like, oh, I'm too busy, or I'm not in the office all the time, so I'm based somewhere else, so we can have virtual coffee date,
Yeah.
or they say like, hey, I'm just too busy, but they always give me other tips like, oh,
Mm,
like this person uh has the same role as I have, maybe you can reach out to him,
yeah.
and they were always very helpful regardless.
I think that's generally what I've noticed as well. Like, people are happy to have human connections, and networking is, it's a two-way street for people who are early in career, right? I think the most common kind of email or reach out that I see is, I would like to understand what you do. I would like to understand the role in your team or whatever. It feels one way. That's
Hmm.
already interesting enough for me to pursue that
Hmm.
conversation. And maybe just to explain what happens behind the scenes, then typically I'll look up that person's profile. So my brain already goes to, is this person going to be a fit in my team? Like, are they employable for the skills I'm looking for? And you've already put yourself on the map just by having that conversation, right? But what could even make it more helpful, probably for the person reaching out when you're networking, is to explain what you're bringing to the table as well. So it could be your skills, it could be areas you work in, it could be, I'm Charlotte, I have a podcast, I like to talk about XYZ topics, and I'd love to reach out to you to understand what you're doing. That might not be one to one related to my team or my job, but it could spark other conversations. So if I know you're interested in psychology, like we
Mm,
discussed, or sustainability or diversity, those are all areas I would love to talk to you about. And suddenly the coffee talk becomes much more than just,
I see.
hey, this is the role, this is how you can
Mm,
apply. And then that personal connection will always stick out more than the five other people who kept it only business. But that's just my personal preference.
I
I
see.
like to know a little bit more holistically about the person, what's driving them, what their interests are. That makes them stand out a little bit, you know?
Especially when you're like really busy, you really try to
Yeah.
understand, okay,
Yeah.
who am I investing my
Yeah.
time
It's
in?
so routine, you know? Like, most people who get networking like requests, or like someone reaches out to them, it's like I don't know, 4 to 5 a week, right? So it becomes very routine after a certain point, very mechanical, if you will, if you're addressing the same topics over and over and over again.
I
So,
was I was actually afraid that I mean, especially when you're early in career, you do not bring a lot to the table. You cannot talk about successful projects you've done or your
mm,
great achievements because you are early in career.
yeah,
So how would I approach someone I mean, I can talk about my interests, but
I think there's a
that's it.
lot you can bring to the table beyond just like achievements with customers. It's understood if you're early in career that you haven't deployed large scale projects at the
Hmm.
customer, right? That's to be expected and that's totally normal. But I think there is a lot you can bring to the table. So, really, I keep going back to your example, but you've also kind of seen a few others that we have who've recently joined, this kind of passion to talk tech, to identify trends, to try to understand topics which show your curiosity. It manifests in a podcast, it manifests in blog posts, it manifests in many different
I
ways,
see.
right? So that is a very, I think, good indicator of the kind of personality and drive somebody has. And um, if someone's implemented a project, right, and done very well at that, that might not be the whole holistic personality I'm looking for still, right? So we talk so much about growth mindset
Hmm.
at Microsoft. And similar to how I think the other big tech companies also recruit, largely it's you're looking for people who are lifelong learners, who are curious. And you can show that without actually having been in the industry. You can show curiosity and initiative and drive without having done that. So find examples of that. And that's very valuable to bring to the table, I think.
Oh, thank you for your perspective.
Yeah.
You were just talking about if someone reaches out to you for a coffee date, you
Mhm.
already have, in mind if this person if it is a fit to your team, for example, or
Mhm.
you really do assess this person.
Yeah.
So let's talk about technical interviews. You also hired people,
Mhm.
probably. Um, how do I stand out? You just mentioned that it's very important to have the curiosity that you're always
Yeah.
that you are a lifelong learner. Can you share some best practices for preparing a technical job interview
Mm.
and also how to stand out from other candidates?
Um, yes. Okay. So I would make it role specific because otherwise it gets a bit broad and I don't know if it's valuable anymore, the tips that I have. But in our org, right, anything that's half customer facing but deep technical, um, I think you need to have an understanding of the level 100 landscape basics. You have to know how cloud works, the advantages, disadvantages, how it compares to everything else on the market. Um, and I would say like there are some basic problems you see over and over. So if you look up, the most common whiteboarding interview sessions, things like build the next Netflix or how do you set up a data lake, those are the typical kind of questions you always get in interviews, but are also relevant because customers do face those kind of problems quite often. So find common problem points that recur with customers often, um, and try to look up solutions to those and understand what that would look like. That already gives you a bit of an idea of most common problems, typical kind of solution, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then you customize to the role in the company. So the level 100 is for the tech at the company, I would say, like no names of the key pieces of technologies they have, maybe some big announcements they've made. It shows effort that you've tried to customize your theoretical knowledge
Hmm.
to the practical application that you'll have to do in this role. Um,
What about the soft skill side? So you were
yeah,
talking about the technical
yeah,
skills that you should bring,
right.
should be very basic. But how do I stand out except for the
Exactly.
growth mindset? Or is it just that?
So it's, I think there's a piece before we go to the soft skills as well, which is how to apply the tech to the customer scenario. So, and there I would say understanding business problems. So it's worth delving into how a company makes decisions as a customer, right? So our end user as Microsoft, if I am to speak to, I don't know, a global or an enterprise company, and I'm sitting with the C-suite, and there's a CFO there and a CEO there and a CMO there, what drives them to decide? What are the metrics that motivate or could convince them? Because
Mm,
that's the influence piece that allows you to convert what you know technically into actually being relevant for their problem. And that's why they would decide then to go for you, right? You could have the best piece of tech on the planet, but if you can't explain to your customer why
Mhm.
it solves their problem and why it's relevant for them or what advantage it brings, then it might not be as successful.
So it's
So,
about finding the right translation from tech to
absolutely.
business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for that, you need to understand those roles. You need to understand decision making on the customer side. You need to understand the typical kind of problems they face. There is material about this, right? So you don't need decades of experience to learn this. I still do it by reading up McKinsey reports, what's happening in FSI.
Mm.
And of course, now I've been a few years in the industry enough to see patterns and trends, but if I weren't, it would still be a great starting point to find out, okay, most FSI
Mm.
customers, so financial or banking or insurance customers, they face this kind of a problem over and over.
YouTube Academy is great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wrapping up everything you've said so far, all the
Hmm.
advices you gave, what career advice, what general career advice would you give someone who's early in career? Maybe from your own experience. I mean, you've been working already how long in tech?
Few years is
Few
a little,
years.
yeah, not at 10 yet, but a little less. So I think this sounds very like Hallmark greeting card, but I would say don't do it for the money. The money will come. Tech is the hottest spot to be in, right? So your driving forces should be about your own learning, about being good at what you do, about your growth, constantly adapting, constantly learning, constantly upskilling. And over time, I think that will pay out in a way that would probably be beyond what you expect. If you're chasing after the next role description or the next jump or the next salary increase, that's not going to be as
Fulfilling.
fulfilling, and probably it won't pay back as well as you investing in your skill set and in
Mm.
building your network. And those two things I think are really what I would focus on. And keep your head down, just get the work done. And I'm so convinced the returns will come probably even sooner than you expect.
I feel like if you found, I mean, it's the same with me. When I found my passion,
Mhm.
you will have the drive and you will always
Yeah.
learn. You will always
Yeah.
improve your skill set. And
Yeah.
money is just a byproduct of it, which is
Yeah.
great. I mean, great
Yeah.
if you have good, if you can earn good money, it's great.
Yeah.
But this is always a byproduct of what
Absolutely.
is actually important.
Yeah. And I think the patience bit ties into that as well. When you're doing something for the reason of learning and for improving yourself and for wanting to become an expert in that field, it becomes irrelevant that, I've been here this long and it hasn't changed and I haven't grown and I haven't gotten a promo. That's a piece I see quite often with early in
Mhm.
career. And I've seen that burning a few bridges and careers as well. If you're, yeah. So that's something to watch out for, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anu, thank you so much for the conversation. I really appreciate you taking time today. And I was
Yeah.
actually looking forward for this interview.
It was my pleasure as always. Thank you for having this with me.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I genuinely hope you liked this episode. As I just started my journey as a podcaster, please provide me any kind of feedback. Your suggestions help me to improve. And if you would like to support my podcast, feel free to have a look in the descriptions. A small coffee donation really makes a difference. Thank you so much and hear you next time. Bye.